Hi, you're watching Mind Milk. I'm Jim, and this is my shed where I make stuff. So before we get into the video today, let's just address a couple of things. It's been a long time since I've uploaded, and there's going to be some changes too. I'm going to talk to you more about those changes at the end of this video, but let's get straight into this one. Today's video is going to be about Nine Men's Morris. That's something I've spoken about before on this channel, a quite lengthy video about the history of the game, as well as a couple of videos about DIY boards that I've made. This is going to be another board construction, but this time it's an absolutely tiny miniature version of the game, which has a box, and inside you can keep the game pieces. This was made on a laser cutter, and it's actually part of a plan that I'm putting together to start selling some of my designs and creations online. So keep following the channel to find out more about that as we go. So along with the visuals of designing and cutting the box to go in your eyes, I've also got some interesting audio to go into your ear, which is taken from my podcast, Mind Milk Theory, and talks about medieval magic because it intersects with Nine Men's Morris in an interesting way, and I think you're gonna enjoy it.
In the 11th century, the discourse around magic seemed to mostly revolve around the church denouncing specific practices and individuals. Magic wasn't so much a practice, but a charge brought against people. By the 15th, however, there were books and magicians and experts, some of whom were even in the church. You see, in the Middle Ages, people not only believed in a vast and populated unseen spiritual world, but they also believed that there was secret knowledge and aspects to every part of life and every mundane object. To learn about the arcane nature of the world was not in itself a bad thing. Nature comes from God after all, and so knowledge of its hidden sides was a virtuous pursuit for anyone serious about their faith. It was the wielding of that knowledge for one's own ends that was dangerous. Magic was often to do with communication with the spirit realm. One might pray to a spirit or have a vision of Christ and be called holy. But it was also believed that demons could be conjured, summoned and bent to human will through the use of magical arts and hidden languages. This created a grey area. Even holy people sometimes spoke using strange languages. The Bible speaks about praying in the Spirit, in tongues no one can understand. Hildegard was a famous Christian mystic who professed to speak in a secret language. So often it was very difficult to tell the difference between someone touched by the divine and a heretic in league with the devil, and often people could be hailed as holy one day and condemned the next. Take Joan of Arc, for example. Then there were the everyday folk. Ordinary people who had to live, work and make their way in a world where religion and magic dominated the consciousness. But we couldn't all go and be mystics, because that required sponsorship. What then for us? What magic do we get? How do we protect ourselves from the dark spiritual forces? To answer that, we get to define that big sexy word, apotropaic. So this is a form of magic that is so casually employed that it is closer to vague superstition or tradition than a capital M magical practice as we imagine it today. It's about the use of symbols, charms or gestures intended to ward off evil or bad influences. Did an older relative put up a horseshoe in their house? Magic. Have you ever knocked on wood? Magic. Charms on your bracelet? That's magic, baby. A controversial statement for a lot of people. A crucifix on your necklace? That's very close to apotropaic practice. In the Middle Ages, apotropaic magic was all the rage. You saw it used in cathedrals in the form of grotesques, and in homes in the use of arcane symbols scratched into the wood of the building itself. A famous symbol you might find painted on a house or scratched into the mantle would be a pentagram, which at the time was a stuffy Christian symbol, long before it had been appropriated by occult groups and metal music. Or you might find a daisy flower pattern that represents heaven's sun, or you might find the initials of the Virgin Mary stylized and scratched in to keep devils and witches away. Patterns of lines with no end were also popular. It was believed that demons would become confused and trapped, looking for where the line ends. These markings are sometimes referred to as demon traps. Sometimes they're called witch marks, because they're meant to keep the witches and other spirits out. There's a lot to explore in the design and symbolism of grotesques, and the use of apotropaic magic in places of worship or in the houses of the rich. But that isn't nearly as fascinating to me as the democratic, anyone can do it folk traditions of scratching arcane symbols into door frames and into the timber work of your house. And I should mention, as most of these symbols alluded to religious figures and ideas, I guess it isn't magic at all by some measures, and wouldn't have been in the 12th century, for instance, when you could borrow an amulet from your local vicar. But it was magic, and bad magic at that, by the 15th century, when inquisitors looked for the same items as proof of heresy. And the other thing that's interesting to me is how aspects of this practice linger today, and yet it's not something we necessarily recognise, and arguably things we don't regard as magic may have been regarded that way back then. Like the idea of dressing for success. Describe that to Augustine and he'd probably call you a wardrobe-mancer. We haven't abandoned this magic, we've just changed its name. One of the strangest symbols that came to be used as a glyph of warding was the board for the game Nine Men's Morris. That's a board game you can play, a board game that was played throughout the Middle Ages, and that has no obvious religious roots. Though some historians have suggested connections, there is no direct reference to it from contemporary sources that I'm aware of. It fascinates me that the game gathered a deep symbolic meaning through a folk tradition that is not recorded and is now being completely lost. Perhaps they were responding to the powerful experience of playing a game. The simulated and contained world of a game feels intense in the moment, but as soon as it's completed and the game is finished, the pieces go back to being mundane objects. There's a certain magic in that experience. We can't know why Nine Men's Morris became a magical symbol, but it does demonstrate the powerful human ability to read meaning into the mundane, to create significance out of thin air, just by virtue of our imagination and consideration of that thing. And perhaps that's the real magic, the transformation of the mundane into the supernatural that takes place entirely within our own minds.
So there's my Nine Men's Morris board, both the tiny one and a larger, more reasonable sized box, which has a really lovely hinge design on it, I think. I've really enjoyed designing these. The idea is that these will soon be available to buy on Etsy or some similar platform, along with other designs that I've been working on. Everything from laser cut beetles that could work as a pencil topper or as a brooch. Speaking of brooches or badges, here is a tiny Game Boy that I've been sporting, and I designed this too. The best thing about it is that there is a little tiny copy of Metroid 2 inside. One of the best games on the system, I think you'll agree. To accompany the new direction, there's been a whole rebrand. So gone is the hand-painted brain. That's gone, and in with a new logo. And look, I even made it on the laser cutter as well. I'm going hard in on this thing. I hope that you won't be too annoyed with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.